Well, welcome again, everyone. We're so delighted to have you here with us today. My name is Jen Evers. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Professional Development here at the International Coalition of Girls' Schools. And today we are so delighted and honored to have Donna Jackson Nakazawa here with us. Donna is an award-winning journalist. She is the author of 7 books, most recently Girls on the Brink. And she also has developed her own curriculum called Writing to Heal for adults. Donna was brought to our attention by actually one of our own folks in one of our girls' schools, just about the work that she's done around neuroscience and girls and anxiety. And obviously with the findings that came out from the CDC just a few weeks ago, we really felt like this was a critical time to have this conversation and could not think of anyone better to help us think about how we're helping our girls in our schools than Donna. So with that, Donna, I'd love to turn it over to you and thank you in advance. One thing I do want to say is we've left plenty of time for questions at the end of this webinar. So if you have questions that arise while Donna is talking, feel free to pop those in the chat, but we'll also allow you to unmute and ask questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's great to see your faces, and I'm going to, without further ado, share my screen and get going here. Give me 1 second. All right, so hopefully you're seeing what you should be seeing. So obviously, as Chen so beautifully said, I have just finished a book, being on book tour for a book called Girls on the Brink. And today, really what my hope is to share with you some of the newest science on girls' biological brain development across puberty and adolescence. Particularly, we're going to focus on how the female developing brain processes stress and trauma at puberty, because it can be a super powerful guide, right, to helping us better step in and be the adults we want to be for girls today, given the times in which we live. And then I promise about halfway through our hour together, and again, we'll have a half hour at the end for questions, I'll do a deep dive into new neuroscience-based strategies for growing strong girls in these very complex and troubled times, and especially the role that you as educators can play, right? So I believe, and I wouldn't have written this book if I didn't believe, that a really good litmus test for the health of any society is how well it treats its girls and how well its girls are faring. And when we look at the mental health of girls, especially in America today, but also in many other countries, one thing becomes super clear, and that's that we as a society are failing pretty miserably. Depression is now happening much earlier in girls than it used to, often by ages 12 or 13. Girls are twice as likely to suffer from anxiety as young men. And in 2021, suicide attempts increased 51% among adolescent girls, and that was compared with 4% among boys. Come on, slide. But as Jen mentioned, we just had this huge study come out, that biannual report from the US Centers for Disease Control, and that showed us that the situation since 2021 has become much worse. Look, it's not every day that a major government agency comes out with a quote like this: America's teen girls are engulfed in a growing wave of sadness, violence, and trauma. I can tell you as a reporter, we don't see that every day. And the reason that they use this very, very strong language is that the biannual report on youth and risk behavior found that 1 in 3 teenage girls has seriously considered suicide, and 57% now report feeling persistently sad or hopeless. Excuse me, my allergies have been really giving me hell, so just bear with me today. So I want to put that 57% statistic in a little bit of context and tell you that when I first started doing reporting for Girls on the Brink, I followed a lot of researchers and dug into a lot of studies. That's my job. And in 2019, a major study came out showing that 1 in 3 girls reported feeling persistently sad or hopeless. So you can see how this started before the pandemic. And today, 57% of girls report feeling that persistent sadness or hopelessness. That is a huge increase from just 4 years ago. Another recent study showed that adolescent girls today are more likely than any previous generation and more likely than boys to agree with the following phrases. Whenever I try to get ahead, something or somebody stops me. I feel I don't have much to be proud of. Sometimes I think I'm no good at all. I feel I can't do anything right. And I feel that my life is not very useful. So this is really concerning. I know that if you're here, that we can all agree on that. So I want to emphasize this existed, as I said, 2019, the numbers were already there. This downward trend in girls' mental health has existed for a long time. And this disparity between how girls are doing and how boys are doing that arises during puberty. That gap between how girls are doing and how boys are doing has continued to widen. For those of you who are going to ask me later, really good question, can all of this be attributed to higher rates of diagnosis or by girls simply being maybe more willing to talk about their problems or voice their sadness? Well, that is not the case. These studies that you see, this national data, screens teens to see if they've faced emotional or behavioral concerns so significant that it has disrupted their normal life. Have they lost interest in all of their former activities? Has it lasted for 12 months or longer? Did it require counseling? So this frame that we're looking at for how girls are doing is not about girls talking about their feelings. It's about shifts in their lives. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what kind of stress we're talking about here. So some of you may know I wrote the book Childhood Disrupted, which is about childhood stressors in the family and household domain, or what we call adverse childhood experiences. And those household stressors are adversities that a child faces in their own home. Another form of stressors are environmental stressors, natural disasters, climate change, hurricanes, earthquakes, exposure to toxins, a global pandemic. And then we have a third category, which we think of as community stressors, the threat of racism, sexism, discrimination, poverty, community violence, school shootings, and high pressure academics with earlier benchmarks. And then sociologists have now added a fourth bucket of stressors, thanks to the influx of social media and so much of kids' lives being spent online. And those are social stressors. Of course, social and emotional stressors have always been around for kids. You know, where are you going to sit in the cafeteria? But as kids live out more of their lives online and on social media, navigating being liked or disliked or critiqued on TikTok or Instagram, that fear of being made fun of or left out by peers has become a major form, a major domain of childhood stress. The bottom line here is that what this science tells us is that we're raising girls in an era that is radically different from the era that you and I grew up in. And that is true, and I'll talk about this in a minute, for anyone on this call who is 28 years or older, and I'll explain that in a second. So we also know for the first time that unrelenting chronic stress can affect girls' bodies and brains in really unique and distinct ways. And that this science, coupled with the stressors that are coming at girls today, which are unique to modern times, these are the drivers of today's mental health epidemic, more and more important to understanding this trend than we previously realized. So I sort of hinted that I'm going to be talking about female adolescent mental health and the female adolescent brain and the female adolescent brain on adversity. So why am I making such a big deal about this? And why are we just learning and talking about the science of female adolescent mental health now? Well, here's a fact that may surprise you. It was only in 2016 that the NIH actually asked for the first time that sex differences be factored into the design and reporting of preclinical research on mental health. Before that, studies on how stress affects the brain and mental health relied on solely male research models, and that skewed research findings, right? Because it's preclinical research that is then extrapolated into clinical research. And everything begins in neuroscience in that preclinical animal research model. Now, it took a few years for those studies to get going, for female models to be included, and we're just starting to get some of that information now, which I'm going to share with you today. As one scientist put it, it's hard to believe, but researchers didn't want those pesky hormones to get in the way of their research findings. And it turns out that the mechanisms by which chronic stress leads to depression in females turns out to be very different than in males. And these differences begin to manifest in puberty. For those of you who are old enough to kind of liken this to something else that happened with female health, this is really similar to heart disease, right? Which until recently, gender bias led to women dying in droves because all of that research had been done on the male heart. So another question I want to get out of the way, you might ask me, rightly so, well, what about boys? Aren't they suffering too? I'm the mother of a son as well as a daughter. And the answer is boys are struggling. Of course they are. How could you be a child growing up in today's world and not be struggling? These are stressful times for all children. It's also true that anxiety disorders in boys often manifest as behavioral or attention disorders. And boys are still more likely to commit suicide compared to girls, though that gap is really narrowing as the rate of female adolescent suicide rises. But as the rate of mental health disorders among girls really rises disproportionately, it would be a disservice for us not to dive into the why. So you may also be asking, why is she using terms like girls and boys, if female and male? Well, here's why I'm doing that. And here's what I mean by them. For the purposes of this talk, I am focusing on biological differences between cisgender women and cisgender men, meaning those who identify with the gender that was assigned to them at birth, though I may use the term sex differences. Now, none of this is to negate or should be construed to imply that sex and gender roles cannot shift or be fluid or change for individuals, or to invalidate the gender identity or the lived experience of transgender and non-binary individuals. The hope that I have is that over time, now that we've added women and females into this framework of how stress affects people across development, my hope is that this research becomes more inclusive of these communities and how they fit into this framework. You can ask me about that, but the truth is, we don't have that framework yet, and I want to be really clear about it. All right, so I talked a minute ago about how for those who are 28 and older, your adolescence was radically different from that of girls today. And here's why we know that. When we dig a little deeper into the latest research, which tells us how girls are doing, we can see that this trend really began after 2012, where we started to see this radical dive in how girls were doing. And it is girls in this cohort who also grew up and entered their teen years with the explosion of smartphones and social media, right? This work is by Jean Twenge. She's well known for her research on social media and girls, but it's really, really interesting that for girls who are 29 and older, we do not see this same vulnerability. All right, so I'm going to take a frame here on social media, some of the latest facts on how social media affects girls. Some of this you're going to know, but we're going to run over it anyway, just to kind of bring it home how important it is. So as you may know, the more time a girl spends on social media, the more likely she is to develop depressive symptoms, poor body image, lower self-esteem. This association is much stronger for girls than boys. 40% of teens say they started feeling unattractive when they started using Instagram. They also feel that this app undermines their confidence in their friendships, even as it's supposed to be building friendships. Teens report, and I know they tell me they want to spend less time on Instagram and social media, but they actually don't feel that they have that locus of control to do it. Girls today spend twice as much time on social media. Now, the majority of girls starts using these apps between 8 and 13, even though Meta says users are supposed to be 13 to have an account. And in 2012, the rates of teen depression, loneliness, and suicide, as we said, began to rise sharply. And it was around that time that Facebook added their like button and Twitter added a retweet button, and you began to have all those reshare options and like options on social media apps. And to leave you with one other statistic, 32% of girls say that Instagram made them feel worse about their bodies. So why is all of this so harmful for girls? Well, girls are more likely on social media to receive very critical and negative sexist messages about their body and their face and their appearance. Messaging also on social media sexualizes the female body at increasingly younger ages. There's very, very little distinction on social media apps between being a girl and an adult woman when it comes to being sexualized. The more time a girl spends on social media, as we said, the more likely she is to develop depressive symptoms. And among girls and boys who use social media for the exact same amount of time, social media is more strongly associated with depression in girls. So we know that when girls are on social media, they have more feelings of upward comparison. They're more likely to scroll, stare, and despair. And that's because, of course, bodies and faces are and lives are edited to depict this unreal image of female perfection that nobody can live up to. At the same time, clickbait algorithms intentionally drive derisive and critical comments. And this opens the door to shaming, critiquing, being disliked and commented on 24/7. At the same time, social media has really cranked up the volume of misogynistic voices and views. And all of this has a particularly strong effect on girls and young women. You might think about it this way. It really creates a profound state of cognitive dissonance, right? There's this pressure to meet this ideal, rise up to this ideal of physical female perfection in behavior and appearance, but you also have to stay vigilant in the face of the sexual harassment that will attract in a misogynistic society. So here's the thing. Regardless of the positive messages that girls are getting at home, at the dinner table, hopefully at school with you as their educators and teachers, when girls encounter more destructive messages from the outside world about what we're all willing to normalize when it comes to the treatment and equality of women, our voices cannot always compete with that larger sexist cultural vibe. If in daily life, girls are repeatedly exposed to themes that normalize being sexualized and objectified, that will slowly over time exert influence over their self-view. And even a well-loved girl's sense of who she is will diminish over time amid an avalanche of sexist messaging. As one teen girl I followed a bunch of teen girls for a couple of years, as one said to me, if you want to be popular at school, you have to first be popular on Instagram and TikTok. And that means being hot. And being hot means being sexualized as if you're a grown woman, even though you're 11. And all of this you have to manage while you're also fielding critical, derisive, sexist comments and responses to your efforts from boys and men, and sometimes other girls. But that's not all. If you succeed in being popular, in being liked, and being hot, she told me, you have to also worry about being harassed or stalked or raped because, well, you're too hot. So it's no wonder that social media use is more likely to be associated with depression for girls. So what is social media doing to a kid's brain in real time? Well, when kids scroll, the reward system in the brain gets real hot and activated, similar to when you or me, when we think about winning the lottery or that bite of chocolate that we want to have. And here's something really fascinating. Pursuing what other teens like, what gets the like and share button, including posts that show high health risk behaviors, over time turns off kids' be careful filter. It turns off the areas in the brain that tell kids to be careful, which over time alters that decision-making quality, that ability, that capacity for good decision-making. Now, while all this is happening, the brain is also anticipating more future rewards, more of a dopamine hit by scrolling more. And here's the thing, folks. Images, which are really what Instagram and TikTok are all about, are more likely to evoke a strong physical reaction and inspire kids to mimic behavior than words. They get to the brain faster, they move faster, and they deactivate those be careful filters faster. So that's just my little rant on social media. Thanks for listening to that. And we'll move on here to some of the other things that are playing a role in today's female adolescent mental health crisis. And again, then we will pivot to some strategies. So I want to talk just for a minute here about how we have really stolen girls in between years. We talked about how girls who are 28 and younger are having this radically different experience. And here are some aspects of that I know you all are really well aware of, but I just want to bring it home. So between the ages of 7 and 13, for most of us who are sitting on this webinar today, girls traditionally had time and space just to deepen their friendships, explore their identity, and really develop emotionally and psychologically without so much pressure. You had a little time to lie on the grass or figure out how to make genuine bonds and friendships, what it feels like to safely explore the world and figure out what sparks your interest. Now, these years are the bridge between childhood and adolescence, and so much, as you'll see in a minute, is happening in the brain during this period. But we've taken that away, that period of safe, pressure-free exploration. We have replaced it with this period that's marked by super competition, more threat and reward judgments on social media, earlier sexualization, as I just said. And there's also the growing feeling of familial isolationism, right? Which adds to this stress burden, just at a time when kids really need to know that somebody has their back before they go out into the world on their own. And this leads to the loss of what was once this extended period of safe passage into childhood and the teen years. And we've also, of course, you know better than anybody, we've ramped up those earlier benchmarks for higher academic performance with our eye on the college process. So childhood has radically changed. Now, I want to talk for a little bit about how our lived environment shapes our brain health. So our nervous system is always poised to detect threats. That's really our source code as humans. The brain is really a detective. It's always on the lookout for possible new threats. And every second, a child and teen's brain is just dancing with messages from the environment. You can think of it really simply across development. What the brain cares most about is the answer to one simple question. Am I safe right now or am I not safe? So for those with a history of adversity or who have experienced more chronic stressors, that sense of hypervigilance is even more acute. So this next little bit is going to be for the nerds in the room, but I think it's really, really important. So how is it that chronic unpredictable stress affects the developing body and brain so acutely? Well, chronic Unpredictable stress. First, let's define that. That means that a child or teen really never knows when that next stressful thing will occur. And this leads to, of course, you guys know this, a hyper alert state, that fight, flight, freeze, that stress response is on, it's elevated more of the time. Think of it like a garden hose that should turn on, be on when you need it, when there's high stress, turn off when you no longer need it. But over time, when there's chronic unpredictable stress, epigenetic changes occur in the genes that allow that stress management to turn on and off. That garden hose stays turned on. And that means that the body and brain becomes flooded with an increase of inflammatory stress chemicals and hormones more of the time. And over time, this damage cascade, that's my term, can lead to significant changes in the architecture of the brain and the development of the immune system. This is especially true when the brain is being remodeled during puberty. I will break all this down, I promise. So let's just dive in for a second. How is it? Because someone's going to ask me, and it's a great question. How is it exactly that emotional stressors and chronic stress can later manifest in changes in the brain? I mean, literally synaptic changes in the brain, which lead to, in turn, mental health disorders. Well, that has long been a medical mystery for a really long time in medicine, and we'll delve into that in a second. We have long had clues that higher levels of stress-related inflammation in the body are linked to higher rates of psychiatric disease. Just to throw out a couple of quick studies, again, this is for the nerds in the room. Children at age 10 with higher levels of inflammatory biomarkers are more likely to have psychiatric disease by age 18. Women with elevated levels of stress factors are 3 times more likely to develop depression in the next 4 years. And researchers at Johns Hopkins have shown that they can use these measurements of physical inflammatory biomarkers to predict suicide attempts. So that link, right, between stress, interior physical inflammation, and mental health is something that we've started to figure out over the past couple of years. But it's really very recently that we've come to understand the exact mechanisms by which stress and physical inflammation are related to mental health disorders. And that's because for 300 years, scientists believed that our brain was the one organ in our body that was quote unquote immune privileged. It was the only organ in the body that was thought to not be ruled by our immune system. And we can thank early philosophers and anatomists for this. Really, Descartes first put forth that idea of mind-body dualism, that the body and brain functioned as church and state, right? Early anatomists looked at the brain and they saw, oh, it's got this hard skull on it, so it's got to be different than every other organ of the body because it can't really get red hot, painful, and swollen the way other parts of the body can. So it must be that it can't be inflamed. And if it can't be inflamed, then the immune system doesn't have anything to do with it. And that meant that this link between chronic stress, higher levels of inflammation, and a loss of brain synapses really confounded the medical community. Well, we can thank 2 kick-butt female neuroscientists at Harvard for taking a deeper look at this relationship and discovering the true role of a tiny little cell in the brain called microglia. I mentioned that I wrote the book Childhood Disrupted about trauma in children's lives. I also wrote a book about microglia because I fell so in love with them and they were so intriguing, called The Angel and the Assassin, and told the story of these researchers and their incredible work to show that these tiny little cells in the brain are actually immune cells. On the 7th day of gestation, in utero, they break off from our immune cells and they rise up into the brain, where from cradle to grave, they oversee our brain health. And here's the part that I want you to remember. These little immune cells in the brain, microglia, are very easily activated by stressors, just like your immune system in your body. And when microglia detect a threat, that could be toxic stress, emotional trauma, infections, they morph, and I've watched them on researchers labs, from these good little cells that help brain health to these big fat Pac-Man like cells that run around eating away at neural synapses. This is a huge discovery in neuroscience. Bottom line, microglia are always constantly in dialogue with the body's immune system, deciding how our nervous system will respond to stressors. And when there are too many stressors in the environment, microglia can destroy necessary and healthy synapses. And this can lead to too much pruning and not enough neural connectivity, which can result in anxiety and depression and mood disorders. So that's going to be really important in a minute when I delve a little bit deeper into girls' development across puberty. So we're going to talk for a minute about social stress, and I want to introduce you to a really important new understanding in the research called social safety theory. And to understand this, you're going to have to take a dive with me way, way back into the past. So why is social stress such an acute type of stress? This is rooted in our evolutionary past, a time when traumatic experiences could mean death, or much more so, obviously, than in modern life. This is because early in our human history, being excluded or slighted, or literally somebody just rolling their eyes at you across the communal fire, that was a signal that you might soon be left behind. And that, if you were left behind, if you were sort of set to the outside of the tribe, that would set you up for more vulnerability to predators and starvation. And for this reason, our immune systems evolved over the millennia to prick up and get activated at the first sign of emotional distress to prepare for physical danger. I had the researcher, George Slavich, UCLA, he's a professor of psychiatry there, has developed this theory. And what he and many other neurobiologists have come to understand is that because we want to be at the center of the tribe, because being at the edge of the tribe meant that we were far more likely to be picked off by a predator or a warring tribe, or have no food or shelter or protection, which, as I said, in turn would make us more likely to be exposed to the elements, which in turn would make us more likely to be wounded and have an infection. Our immune system sees social stress as the most dangerous type of stress that we can face. So given the ill effects that could follow a small social slight, it really isn't that surprising that anthropologically, facing even moderate signs of being laughed at, dismissed, gossiped about, ostracized, would rev up the immune system to prep at that very first sign of being left out for major physical harm. Bottom line, over thousands of years, our immune system evolved so that in the face of social threats, we're ready for physical danger. That is why our immune and nervous systems respond to emotional stress as if it is a physical threat. This is super important to understanding what's happening for girls today, even in modern times. That sense of feeling left out, those perceived slights, can signal the immune system to go on alert and become overactivated. Just that hint of social stress or adversity or social threat being evaluated by your peers, social conflicts, being rejected, worrying if your friends don't like you anymore, being made fun of by a clique at school, prick up the immune system. And as we saw earlier, we don't want to see that elevation in those bioinflammatory immune markers, because that is related to bad things in terms of mental health. Now, in today's world, if you're made fun of on TikTok, or you're critiqued on Instagram, or people make fun of your face, your clothes, that's really terrible, and that is going to affect you. But it isn't going to lead usually to your being physically wounded. But guess what? To the developing brain, it feels as if it could. It actually feels as if it will. So this brain immune wiring in the face of social threat has been around for a lot longer than social media, right? This is what evolutionary biologists call an evolutionary mismatch. Our brain wiring set us up for this, and modern life is very different now. But nevertheless, it's triggering this harmful biophysical response, even if those feelings are unrealistic in response to being made fun of on Instagram. Okay, so let's talk about estrogen in puberty here. Estrogen is a superpower hormone. It enhances every cell in the body. It's why women can do everything males can do during a typical day, but do it in smaller bodies with smaller organs while also making room for a uterus to carry another life. But estrogen, guess what? As it surges in during puberty, it also jacks up the immune system. Now, the brain is where puberty first begins. It's at puberty that the brain factors in all of the emotional and social stress you've experienced in your entire life, including stress in your current environment. And in the face of repeated stressors, or when there has been a history of physical or social or virtual stress, estrogen can jack up the immune system and the body and brain stress machinery in ways that testosterone does not. And that means that estrogen at puberty, in the face of unrelenting stressors, and I want to be very clear, this is only true in the face of unrelenting stressors, estrogen stops being this evolutionary advantage and it flips to being a disadvantage, exacerbating that stress immune response. That again links into what we already talked about, heightened inflammation, the exacerbation of neural pruning and pruning necessary synapses. And this plays a role in determining how well the female adolescent brain will wire and fire up for lifelong mental health. So, as we said in the beginning, it's long been assumed that by studying the male brain, we could understand how stress affects the developing female brain. But that has turned out not to be the case. The mechanisms by which chronic stress lead to depression and other concerns in females is different than in males. And more studies are coming out to show how true that is. For instance, in the face of emotionally stressful events or social threats, girls' brains show greater activity and elevated blood flow in the left amygdala. I find this study so fascinating because the left amygdala is, well, you know, the amygdala is that alert center of the brain. You all know that. But the left amygdala is an area of that alert center that's associated with being stuck in high rumination. And rumination are negative feelings and thoughts, usually dumping on yourself or judging others, versus taking action. Conversely, boys' brains show more activity in areas associated with distraction and behavior and action. But high rumination and low action, which is what we see when girls are when they face repeated unrelenting stress, that high rumination with low action is correlated very highly to an increased risk of depression. Now, adding to this, puberty is happening several years earlier for girls, and this is a real problem. Why is this a problem? Because it used to be that adolescence happened before puberty. A couple of years of adolescence got in there for the brain to figure out how to handle social and emotional distress, to build up some of that wiring for resiliency, that scaffolding that we talk about. But puberty is coming in earlier than adolescence, often many years earlier. And that means that hormones are rushing in much earlier. And that's a problem because as puberty happens earlier, the parts of the brain that put social and emotional stress and distress in context help analyze thoughts and impulses, discern even when it's time to ask for help or how to ask for help, and how to handle hard things. Those parts of the brain have not wired and fired up yet. And this also contributes to today's female adolescent mental health crisis. So to summarize this, and we're getting into strategies in the next slide, The normal brain remodeling that should happen during adolescence is happening earlier at a time when the brain shouldn't be getting remodeled. And the brain is being shaped at the wrong time by the wrong things. This pubescent brain estrogen stress interaction, we now know, is a significant reason why adolescence is such a big window for the development of anxiety and depression in girls. So we talked about how the problems girls face today are entirely different in the past. But here's the good news, folks. At puberty, girls' brains become incredibly agile, just taking in and processing all kinds of information about the world. Honestly, anyone who is raised an adolescent girl or taught one, which is all of you, knows her spidey sense and her ability to read the room is completely unparalleled. And when girls grow up in super healthy environments, when they feel they matter, when they feel they belong, that adults have their backs, that they have agency, that they have a locus of control over their lives, these years are a time of golden promise. And what I want to do is talk about how you as educators can build on more of that, because the things that make the female adolescent brain more responsive to negative factors in the environment also make the female adolescent brain remarkably flexible and responsive to positive shifts in a girl's lived experience. I hope you found that knowing this science was really powerful. I think it's so important that we understand it, because it tells us that everything we do, every single thing we do to bring down girls' brain and body stress machinery will matter. And at the same time, it tells us that as levels of toxic stress are rising in girls' lives, we must increase psychological safety. So what is a neuroprotective environment? Well, I like to think of it as those nesting dolls, where from each circle around a girl's life, with a girl being that smallest figure inside, her family, and then her school and community and the larger world are all giving her a sense that she is seen, connected, valued, and that and helping her to develop autonomy and resilience. The goal is really for each of us, in whatever role we play in girls' lives, to help make this super difficult passage into adulthood smoother and easier, and also more joyful. So, all right, I am going to get into educators here, and study after study shows that one of the biggest ways that educators can make a difference is by examining and managing your own stuff. And when I say examining, I mean examining your own story and how stressors affect you in your current life. Now, we know that so much is being asked of teachers today, an inordinate amount. Teachers need more support than ever. And a brand new study out 2 weeks ago from the National Center of Educational Statistics found that, yes, 7 out of 10 schools report more students need in-house mental health services, but teachers too are asking for this. With the increased onus on teachers imposed by the pandemic, school shootings, students' mental health needs, it's no surprise that teachers report record levels of concerns about their own mental health and well-being. And heavens, why wouldn't they? 30% of schools now report increased requests from teachers for mental health services for them. And I really believe if we're going to help girls, we must start with ourselves. And girls spend as much time with educators as their own families. And teachers' mental well-being really matters. And now you all may know, some of you may know, that I've written an awful lot about the intersection of adversity and stress and well-being across the lifespan. And we have over 2,000 studies which tell us that if our own history of adversity is unresolved, or if we are facing chronic high stress levels ourselves, that will affect how well we are able to respond in the moment to stressors around us right now, Part of the reason for this is that the brain cannot access our higher level thinking when we have had a high level of adversity, and that adversity on our own personal trauma remains unresolved. The bottom line is that when we're caught up in our own reactions, we really can't be the calm adult who soothes the child in front of us. Look, it's really hard to soothe others when you're caught up in trying to soothe yourself. And I'm not coming at you guys like, oh, you're doing something. Of course, it's overwhelming. Teachers, I've never seen a generation where teachers are being asked to do more than they are today. What I am trying to say is that when you are given the support to recognize and work to understand and examine your own story and your own stress responses, we have many studies which show us that that makes educators better able to help their kids manage distress and feel safe and regulated. In fact, a recent study showed that those who went on, took a course to understand how trauma affected them, became more aware of the effect of trauma in their own lives and were better able to deal with children and parents. They were able to remain calmer and more mindful in the face of children's challenging behaviors. And we have a lot of studies on this in Head Start classrooms, that when we help individuals to look at their own trauma, their own stress levels, we see that they're better able to work within the classroom. Why would this be? Well, this is because children and teens' neurobiology mirrors ours. They literally borrow our composure, which helps them to regulate their own brains and brings down their stress machinery. We can thank mirror neurons in the brain for this. When we enter a state of calm, children and teens, they start to mirror what we're doing. They literally start to breathe more deeply. They take on our relaxation, but this requires noticing the links between your current stress levels or past experiences and the present moment, and how this overactivates your own nervous system. I can't think of a group of people who better deserve to take time to do this work and have the support they need to do this work than teachers. So the fancy word for this is called biosynchrony, the biological synchronicity that happens when every cell in you offers up a state of calm to every cell in them. Now, this is a tall order. I am not going to lie to you. This is the work of a lifetime. I'm touching on it for literally 2 minutes here today, but I hope you'll remember that you guys are worth it. You deserve to have the resources and the time to do this work on yourselves. And we have a huge body of research to show that it matters in kids' lives. I also want to point out a really big study that came out recently about positive childhood experiences and how much they matter and how well kids do. And that includes having at least 2 non-parent adults who take a genuine interest in them. And yes, I'm looking at you. So that means that we really want to power up on benefactors and mentors. We know that children find resiliency because adults provide safe environments in which they feel seen and known and validated. That can be a teacher, it can be a counselor, it can be a coach, it can be a social worker. But we can also create more conditions to build out that benefactor network for girls, broaden relationships in the larger community. Pair girls who are really into poetry with local poets, girls who code with women in the community who code, girls who love filmmaking with adult female filmmakers. Having this strong female benefactor network, I can tell you, after interviewing so many girls and talking to so many groups of girls, it makes a profound difference in their feelings of mastery and psychological safety. So I have interviewed thousands of people in the course of writing 7 books, and it always strikes me that there comes that moment in any individual's story of well-being where they tell me about the adult who saw them, even decades later. Kids recall, adults recall, often with tears in their eyes, catch in their voice, who made them seen valued, even if that adult was in their lives for a very short period of time. Most often that person is a teacher. It is the teacher who took the time to get to know them and lend them books of poetry. I am that girl, by the way. I was in 7th grade. My father died very suddenly from a medical accident. And my 7th grade teacher, Mrs. Lindell, thank you, gave me the key to the teacher's library. And I sat on this stinky little brown sofa. Any of you know those in the teacher's lounge, and read Edith Wharton and Henry James. For the first time, it changed my world. Later, one of my art history teacher in high school took me on a college tour because she wanted me to see some of the girls' schools. She thought I'd be a good match for them. But even though Mrs. Lindell was in my life for just a minute, it changed my life. And I want you to know that those small moments really matter. I spend my life listening to people's stories, and they hold on to those stories about their teachers and coaches and counselors for a lifetime. They're golden moments in which they know that somebody saw them and knew they were worthy, and that there was something worthy in them in a time where they didn't feel that for themselves. Now, let's talk about parents for a second. Good research shows that parents are vastly overconfident in their ability to see their child's moods clearly. 90% of parents say that they're confident that they would recognize depression in their child. At the same time, they also admit they cannot discriminate between a child's normal ups and downs across the teen years and depression. Other research shows that half of parents, 50%, are unaware when their child is having suicidal thoughts. So the truth is, parents aren't always having the insight that we wish that we as parents, I'm a parent, that we want to have into our children's states of minds. Now, here's how important parent-child connection is to student flourishing. The odds of a child or teen flourishing are 12 times greater for children whose parents responded very well to one question. I'm telling you, as a reporter, we never see a study with this kind of a correlation. Child or teen flourishing is 12 times greater for children whose parents respond very well to one question. How well can you and this child talk about anything? How well can this child turn to you with things that really matter? This high level of family connection is also associated with those low levels of stress hormones and inflammatory biomarkers. So the opposite of trauma is connection. The goal is, from whatever lever of power we are in a girl's life, to create psychological safety. That is the intrinsic interior belief that you can speak your ideas and take risks without any fear of ridicule, humiliation, or retaliation. When a girl is agitated and she experiences her distress in the presence of a nurturing, caring adult, her nervous system comes down. It's less likely to get stuck in fight, flight, freeze. And then girls are able to spill what's really, really, really on their minds. So we all mess up. I've probably given 1,000 talks in my life, and back in the day when they were all in real rooms with, other than your beautiful faces here, I would always ask, is there anyone here who's never messed up with your kid, whether you're a teacher or educator? I've never seen a hand. So we all mess up. But here's a really great piece of news. If after you mess up, you make a repair, that memory does not stick in a child or teen's brain. The sooner you make a repair, the less likely it is that an unhappy memory will stick. So statements of repair are pretty simple, right? Hey, when I said that, it came out wrong. I'm sorry. Let's hit the reset button. Let me try this again. Hey, I want to be helpful, and clearly what I said was not helpful right there. Can you help me understand what would help you the most right now? or I clearly don't know everything. I don't have all the answers. Or, hey, I raised my voice. I wish I hadn't done that. I'm really sorry. That might have scared you. Let me try again. So the sooner we make a repair, the less likely an unhappy memory will stick. I know that that is super important because we see kids' brains go back and that stress machinery comes down when they see adults take responsibility for their mess ups. Okay, I know a lot of you here are for social media, so we're going to talk about that, and we're going to go on for about 10 more minutes, and then we'll break into questions. So important that we're teaching social media literacy in school wellness programs. Girls tell me, and studies show, they want to spend less time on social. They do not know how. I talked to you about the brain science, which shows that how addictive social media is over time, activating that dopamine, that reward center of the brain. They need adult help. Help girls recognize that things are not what they appear to be. Ask those critical questions, just like you would in Lit Crit, right? Well, in social media, those questions look like this. Who created this? Why do you think they did it? Who's the target audience? Who paid for it? Who gets paid if you click on it? Who might benefit from this? Who might be harmed? What's left out that might be important? Is this credible? And what makes you use your critical thinking skills to say that it is credible? And this is key for girls. Check in with your emotions. Assess your nervous system. How do you feel after you just scrolled for 10 minutes? How do you feel when you look at that, when you're on this person's feed on TikTok? If what you're looking at makes you feel angry or self-critical or left out or even superior, you're being played. Social media algorithms intentionally drive the biggest human emotions. That is how the feeds get people to come back over and over again. And ask girls instead to prioritize their online time with what fills them with good energy, and delete those accounts that activate their nervous system. And discuss that discomfort, walk up to that discomfort that arises when our phones are removed, right? Even adults who hasn't left their phone in the other room for a minute and had a moment of panic wondering where it is. So pediatricians, I talked to a lot of pediatricians in Writing Girls on the Brink, and guess what? They tell me that most families are not having conversations about social media. So from the lever of schools where you're doing parent programming, it's important to encourage parents to help their daughters create healthy boundaries around social media, to turn off those applications, to limit that time, put phones away during meals. For instance, kids are more likely statistically to spill their feelings when they're eating, but they don't do it when the family is on their phones. And suggest diversifying those feeds so that they're seeing images that are showing all kinds of shapes and colors and sizes. And of course, modeling smartphone use as adults. Now, last week, the American Psychological Association came out with a study, which I think is incredibly powerful, showing that slashing screen time to 1 hour a day led to significant improvements in how girls felt about themselves and their bodies. I know that sounds like an impossible heavy lift. Parents say that all the time, but we can see that in communities, when communities come together to do this, it means that kids are less likely to feel left out or stigmatized. And we've seen some groups create a sense of camaraderie around this. Hey, this is the way our community does things, rather than as a rule or demand, and attach it to a deeper layer of meaning and identity as a community. Again, this is a heavy lift, right? We all know that, but this is what's going to make a difference. So we have to talk about it. All right, I want to talk about one of my favorite things when I talk to groups of parents. They love this new movement in teacher-parent communication, the Handle with Care movement. Now, before I talk about that and we move on, I want to tell you how worried parents are that if they reach out to you with concerns about their child, it will harm their child's chances of success. They might not be chosen for Model UN. They might not make the debate team. They might not get the same accolades. Parents often feel they have to go it alone, right? Moms are even more likely to blame themselves when their daughters are struggling and to feel that if they can't fix it by themselves, they aren't good moms. They hesitate because of the stigma and they fear being judged as inadequate parents. So what we want to do from the lever of power of schools is to open the door to two-way communication between teachers and parents, and to do that in a really, really powerful and compassionate way. So one idea is to join this Handle with Care movement. Parents love it. On back to school night, it's pretty simple. Teachers hand out some version of the Handle with Care note. Every teacher has a different way of putting it, but it basically says, if your family, if your child is experiencing a difficult time at home, I want to offer additional support here at school. And all you have to do, you don't have to tell me any details, just send in this note or email me in the subject line, Handle with Care. I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm not going to ask for details, but I will be aware and I will offer up more time, extra time and help and share any observations that I have. So this is a great way to enhance that teacher-parent relationship. We also know that teachers play an instrumental role in helping to catch kids before they fall. And by looking for also school nurses, those shifts that parents can't see at home, a loss of interest in activities, no longer participating or raising their hand in class, changes in schoolwork, socially isolating, somatic complaints, headaches, stomach aches, increased perfectionism, and small changes in behavior. And we want to help children and teens with support before they fall hard, right? So often we wait until kids fall really, really hard and the signs that they're struggling are very, very acute before we get in and make a difference. But we know from a neuroscience perspective that it is healthier for the brain to take action when issues are relatively small, rather than wait until you show serious signs of mental health concerns, or when multiple stressors have piled up from home, school, social media, in a way that can make addressing them all at one time later on much more difficult. So I am a big advocate of therapy. Therapy really matters. You all know that. It's a no-brainer, but I do want to share with you that we have new research on how acutely powerful therapy can be. 30 weeks of psychotherapy is as effective as CBT, and CBT can lead to improvements in depression and anxiety. It also brings down the stress threat machinery. And over time, therapy can shift those genes that we talked about that crank up that stress response. So I love this program going on in Austin, Texas, where schools purposefully opened on-campus mental health counseling centers for middle and high schoolers. This isn't the school counselor. This is a dedicated trauma-informed therapist who has an office on the school's campus and treats students in situ. And what these therapists are doing is addressing school-related and interpersonal stress, and then advocating between teachers and parents. And in this study, researchers compared high school students in the program to those not in the program, and they found a significant reduction in student anxiety and depression, reduction in substance use and behavioral-related issues, and students' grades went up. It also took a huge load off of teachers. All right, we also want to be upstanders, not bystanders, right? So we have good research which shows that when we model how to contextualize and stand up to sexism, we help reverse engineer the messages girls are internalizing. And that helps them take that essential leap that the problem is with our culture and not inside of them. So, here's an example, sexist individual. I don't want to sound sexist, but jump in, then don't be sexist. Or, hey, I'd rather you stop right there. And this is true for when you hear any groups, any comments that are offensive to any group, standing up and being that upstander, not a bystander, will help to reverse that internalized shame that so many kids are growing up with. We're going to close here with 10 things girls tell me, the top 10 things they tell me. One, we, the adults, are doing too much of the talking. I guess after I talked for an hour and 3 minutes, we shouldn't be saying that, but we're jumping in to ask questions or offer advice or be the fixer or the detective while they're still trying to figure out their feelings. And guess what? When puberty comes in so early and estrogen rushes in and you have the kinds of stressors girls have, guess what? They don't yet have the neural scaffolding to really articulate their feelings yet. We have to listen longer, harder, and be more quiet. They often tell you that they're okay because they think that's what you want to hear. But they want you to use your spidey sense to see beneath it. They want to tell you what they're worried about. They really do, but they worry that adults today are too stressed out to handle seeing and hearing their distress. Please believe them when they tell you that they're struggling. They are not just being adolescents having a hard time. The history of female hysteria still plays into how girls feel about confiding and speaking about their difficult feelings today. They are not being dramatic. Believe them when they tell you they're struggling. Extend them the simple courtesy of belief. They have resilience fatigue. It's really hard out there. It is so much harder than you think. Stop expecting them to bounce back from everything. They worry that we, the adults, want them to push through and be brave and be resilient and get past it and do great. And please tell them that you value their mental health more than their determination. I said this earlier, they really want to be online less. They want to be on their phones less. Help them strategize about it in a way that doesn't feel controlling. They do know you care about them. They do, but they want you to show that care by noticing their intrinsic qualities more than their grades or their appearance or their accolades. They know it's not your fault. They know the stressors they're facing are not your fault, even when they act as if it is. Just forgive them when they act their frustrations out with you. If they're acting their frustrations out with you, it may be because you are the only safe place to off-gas them. They don't feel safe. They don't feel secure. They don't feel they have control over their lives today with so many stressors coming at them. They do want to talk about it. They're struggling to find the right words. And that takes us to the top of that top 10 list that we, the adults, are doing too much talking. I talked to Jen, asked me about the program, the Writing to Heal workshop that I founded, that I teach at universities and university health centers and, well, all kinds of groups all over the country. And it takes me back to that thought that the work really, really starts with us and understanding what is making us so stress reactive and doing that work so that we bring our own nervous systems down first. And I talked about the books I've written, and there are some of them. So I'm going to stop sharing. I ate a little bit into your Q&A time. I promise you this, I will not leave until we answer the last question.
Thank you so much, Donna. You've given us so much to think about in the neuroscience. I just find fascinating. Really, really appreciate the depth you went into there. As Donna said, we're open for questions. There was one question asked right at the beginning about whether or not there's a global data about girls and anxiety and depression. I know the CDC obviously was particularly about girls in the United States, but is there any global data out there that you can share with us, Donna?
The UK is seeing the exact same problems we are. I can tell you that there's a ton of data I didn't include from the UK. I wasn't exactly sure how many people would be from the UK. globally, we do see these correlations more in, first world countries for sure.
And as I said, feel free to drop questions in the chat, or if you just want to use the little raise hand feature, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Donna a question. Donna, one question that just came through to me was about what you were talking about, the number of teachers and faculty members who were talking about their own anxiety, and that schools need to be aware of that and support their teachers. Are there ways that schools can do that effectively? Is that something that you can speak to?
Well, I think we're just coming to, after the pandemic, I think that there was so much pressure on teachers just to gut through, right? And now we're coming to the other side of the pandemic. And I think that we're really just starting to take a deep look at supporting teachers for teacher burnout. And how can educators not be burned out right now? If you're not, you're kind of a miracle, truly. So digging into that, I think, is something that we all want to be talking about more. But I know that schools are starting to talk about that. And I'm curious how many people here, do you feel like you're getting enough support for your own mental well-being? I would love to know that. Or do you feel like you need more support for your own mental well-being? How big an issue is this for all of you? I would really love to know that. I know we're not doing like I'm a reporter. I'm going to interview you guys. But we don't have enough information on that. Again, the studies that we do have looked at teachers in difficult populations and in working with kids with behavioral issues and so on. And we know that when those teachers are burned out, when they get more support to go through training, trauma-informed training to work on their own history, their own stressors, they do much better in the classroom. So it's kind of not rocket science that you need time and space to attend to yourself first. It's such a cliche, the old like, put on your oxygen mask first. But we literally haven't given teachers a second to put on their oxygen mask in 3 or more years. Not a second.
Great, thank you. A question that came through is, can you speak to the long-term autoimmune disorders faced by girls having these epigenetic changes?
Wow, are you a listener to my heart? Do you know I wrote the book, The Autoimmune Epidemic? So I dug very, very deep into this, and you may be interested now that we have a better understanding of female health and development with the intersection of stress, that if you know the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, it showed that for every category of adversity a child faced prior to the age of 18, it increased that individual's likelihood of developing mental and physical health problems across the lifespan. Well, guess what? In girls, for every category of stress or adverse childhood experiences that they experience, their chance of later having an autoimmune disease in adulthood so serious that they needed to be hospitalized rose by 20%. And that was not the case for men. So that added stress, estrogen stress exacerbation plays a major role in the development of autoimmune disorders in girls and women. We knew that for a long time. We knew it from the epidemiology. It was first done in the early 90s. Delisa Fairweather at Hopkins started that research with Vincent Politi, who's the father of the ACE research. And they found this stunning correlation. They almost couldn't believe it, the relationship between stress and adversity across development and the development of autoimmune disease in girls and women. It's really staggering. What that means, to put it in real people terms, is let's say you're teaching a girl And that young woman has 3 categories of adversity she's facing, which you may know about, you may not know about. Her parents are divorced. Her dad maybe has a substance use problem, maybe is struggling with alcohol use. And maybe her mom suffers from depression and it isn't being treated. Those are 3 categories of adverse childhood experiences. Her likelihood of developing an autoimmune disease sometime between now and her childbearing years, or, into her 30s or 40s, is 60% higher than the girl sitting next to her who doesn't have those levels of home stress. Now, since then, that research has extrapolated beyond what we call household stressors. Remember that chart I showed in the beginning, those 4 buckets of stressors in kids' lives. We also know that we can include as adverse childhood experiences those other domains of stress that we looked at, community stressors such as poverty, racism, community violence, and other stressors that are social stressors. So yes, it's a great question. And yes, the correlation is the same, which is, I should have just said that. Yes, the correlation is the same.
Fascinating. Thank you. Another person wrote, we are noticing challenges with group chats. So on the phone, starting as early as grade 3. While it is not social media, how do we help guide parents on boundaries around group chats during those tween years?
Wow. Okay. I talked to a school nurse who told me that lots of her kids at 7, 8, and 9 have Apple Watches, and they're able to look at all kinds of things through their Apple Watches that their parents don't even think about. So 3rd grade, wow. So 8, 9 years old. I think that the thing that is most successful that we're seeing is when, again, sort of like with social media itself, I told you my allergies are bad. I'm losing. The most successful thing is when it isn't just a parent and child in the home trying to come at these issues, but where there is some kind of community effect where parents get together. So for all those 3rd grade girls who are 8 or 9 years old, who are on those chats and the problems that are happening because of it, there is a group of parents, there is a community, right? And expanding into that community for awareness and for some agreed upon rules is going to be much more effective. It's like instead of a swimming pool going to the ocean, and trying to make it part of the way that that community does things for their children's well-being. There are always tensions in parent groups. You guys know that better than anybody, right? Yeah, that's a whole other topic. But hopefully 3rd grade is early enough where you can get that community effect going in a way that sometimes it's harder to when things get more competitive as girls get older.
Great, thank you. The next question is about social media and screen time. Do you have any suggestions for limiting screen time and also empowering girls to limit their own screen time?
Well, I think the number one answer is, I don't know if you were here for the part of the talk on social media literacy. Girls are super smart, right? When you go through social media literacy with them, when you go through those questions that I pose that you ask them, it kind of makes a shift for girls. You can see it in real time where they start to realize they're getting played. Girls don't like getting played, right? They don't like that. They do not like it. And when we can help them make that leap through their own critical thinking, the same way you would if you were trying to show racism in a novel, right? You don't come at it and tell them what to think. You come at it with media literacy. You come at it with literary criticism. We want to have social media criticism, and it has to be internalized from a girl's own sense that she is revealing to herself the truth about these platforms. And when you can dig in that way, then you can broaden this conversation about how to limit time. If you come in and you just go, well, the APA says you shouldn't be on social media more than an hour a day, so we're not going to do that. You are just not going to be heard, right? Not when social life today is taking place on Instagram and TikTok. Girls told me if I want to be popular at school, I have to be on these platforms. I had one girl tell me she hated it. She just faked it. She just did everything that everybody else was doing, but she truly hated the time she spent there. It's because it's the new cafeteria, and all of us are old enough to remember walking in the cafeteria and wondering, like, am I going to have a place to sit the first day of high school? Well, that is TikTok. That is Instagram. And so it isn't going to work if that locus of control isn't happening inside of them, if we don't create that sense of wondering inside of them, what's really going on here. I know it's not a simple answer. I wish I could give you a simple answer, but the truth is that that's the answer that works.
Great, thank you. Someone asks, in your book, you mentioned the Starling effect.
Oh,
can you elaborate on that? How can we encourage?
Thank you, reader.
Yeah, how can we encourage coach parents to be more communal versus competitive in such a highly competitive culture?
Yeah, I didn't have time to get into that in this talk, but the starling effect. So starlings are birds that literally go in and they kill other birds' eggs and put their own in the nice cushy spot. And so I call the starling effect, I refer to the starling effect as that super competitiveness that has a big effect on kids. And what girls told me is that, look, as you get older, it gets very competitive. They're only taking, I live in Maryland, they're only taking 2 girls on their travel lacrosse team from my school, on the club team or whatever, or they're only one person from my school is going to Harvard, or 2 are going to Yale. And as kids get older, those spots for everything, for the best writer, the best English student, I've had 2 kids go through a very competitive private school, so I know of what I speak here. That as the passages narrow toward adulthood and toward, adult success, they understand that although they're told that all the other parents have their back and they're baking brownies for the team and they're like driving the minivan to the big swim meet, they know that those passages are narrowing where only a few kids are going to get through into that uber success path. And they also know that other parents want those spots for their kids, right? You all deal with parents every day. And that parents are all jockeying for that position for their child. And over time, what that tells kids is that, sure, I might hang out at Susie's house, but in truth, Susie's mom wants Susie to have all of that success, even though we play lacrosse together or field hockey. And I don't really have the adults around me who will have my back regardless, unconditionally, because they are all marching forward for the same competitive, high prestige outcomes. And that has really changed how kids feel about the communities around them, that they don't feel like the community has their back because they know that they're all competing for the same spots. So this is really why I talk so much about building out that benefactor network, because those benefactors, those mentors may not be your friends' parents. They may not be your friends' parents. So it's part of what I hear from girls, and they know best, is it was building out their benefactor communities with teachers, with coaches, with other women in the community, having what we might think of as proxies other than mom. Mom is the most important one, of course, parents are the most important thing, but having proxies of adult women, or think of the term avatar, not in terms of the movies, but in its original Hindu sense. Avatar meant a being who's here on this planet to make sure that another being can develop and come into their full potential. And to be that female avatar for girls helps them know that they are coming of age in a community that has their back. In terms of coaches being more inclusive, I actually don't really have an answer to that. As long as you're giving out prizes for the best player, and as long as you're in that super competitive environment, it is very difficult to convince kids that they all matter equally. So I would love to have more of a discussion about that and see what you guys think will help. But I can tell you from kids' perspective, from girls' perspective, when things get really competitive, super competitive, they can only do it for so long before they start to burn out and drop out.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. If anyone has one more burning question, I think we can fit it in. So I'm going to wait just a second to see if anyone pops something in the chat or raises their hand.
Or even just a comment.
Yeah, or just a comment. Absolutely. Final question. Thinking of all girls schools, are there any protective factors we can document in all girls environments in the face of these mental health challenges?
Okay, so you know that debate has been going on for a while, right? About the benefits of girls' schools. I will tell you a really, really interesting study that was done at Dartmouth, actually, and I didn't include it here, but I guess it was college. So when they looked at how comfortable girls felt speaking in class, they found that I don't have it right in front of me, so I might flub this up just a little bit, but they found that boys were more likely to raise their hands, even when they were to call out, even when they were all being asked to raise their hands. So it takes me a minute to get this study back in my mental frame. So even when they were all asked to raise their hands, boys were more likely to call out. Boys did, I think, something like 70% of the talking, and they got much more of the teacher's attention. So I think that's the frame through which we can look at the advantages of girls' schools, is when we actually compare how girls are, what their experience is in co-ed environments, and that when we see that there are losses for them there, we can extrapolate that toward advantages toward girls' schools. I hope that's helpful.
Well, as a graduate of Dartmouth College, I could name the girls that had gone to all girls schools because we were the ones who raised our hands and had something to say. So there you go.
I didn't know that about you, Jen. My oldest went to Harvard. Sorry, to Dartmouth. He's a boy. I don't know how much he raised his hand. I wasn't sure.
Well, Donna, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been just so much great information to take in. There's been some great comments in the chat that I'll save and share with you from folks who have found this so incredibly helpful, both as educators and as parents. And I think one of my big takeaways that you said was extend the courtesy of belief. Yeah. I think that really resonates with me. And if we can do more of that with girls as teachers and as parents and as benefactors and avatars and important people in their lives, that will go a long way towards improving the relationship that they have with us and with themselves. So grateful to you for all the time you've taken with us today, and to all of you for sticking around. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day wherever they may be in the world. So thank you again, Donna.
Thank you for having me. And please, just if you remember one thing, it's take care of yourselves. You guys are so important in these girls' lives. I talk to teachers all the time, and they're not getting the support that they need. And I would just implore you to care for yourself, care for your mental health first. It really, really makes a difference, and it will help you help them more. Thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.